She was returned by 5 families, told she was too stubborn, too opinionated, and unfit to be loved. But one rancher, desperate for help and uninterested in etiquette, takes a chance on her. What happens next will change everything for her. And for them. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked this story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The sun blazed mercilessly over the dusty streets of Copper Creek, a small cattle town in Montana Territory. 1885. 17-year-old Abigail Foster stood with her meager belongings, a worn-out carpet bag containing 2 dresses, a hairbrush, and a tattered journal on the weathered porch of Mrs. Willoughby's home for girls. "This is your final chance, Miss Foster," Mrs. Willoughby said sternly, her thin lips pressed into a disapproving line. "The Hendersons are a respectable family. If you fail with them as you did with the others, I fear no one else will take you." Abigail stared at the distant mountains, her green eyes reflecting a defiance that had become her shield. 5 families in 3 years had sent her back to the orphanage, each time with complaints about her willful nature and improper conduct for a young lady. "I understand, Mrs. Willoughby," she replied, though understanding was different from accepting. The stagecoach appeared on the horizon, churning dust in its wake. As it approached, Abigail noticed a weather-beaten man with silver-streaked hair climbing down. He wore a leather vest over a faded blue shirt, his face tanned and lined from years under the open sky. "Mr. Henderson?" Mrs. Willoughby called her, voice shifting to a honey-sweet tone that Abigail had never heard directed at her. The man nodded, removing his hat. "Ma'am, I've come for the girl." Mrs. Willoughby gestured toward Abigail. "This is Abigail Foster. She's spirited, but hardworking when properly motivated." Mr. Henderson's weathered face remained impassive as he studied Abigail. "My ranch needs help, not another problem. You willing to work hard, girl?" "I can outwork most men I've met, Mr. Henderson," Abigail replied, chin raised. "And I learn quick." Hint of amusement flickered in his eyes. "We'll see about that. The stage leaves in 15 minutes. As they boarded the stagecoach, Mrs. Willoughby handed Mr. Henderson a sealed envelope, her paperwork, and a full accounting of her difficulties. "What difficulties might those be?" he asked. "She refuses to conform to proper ladylike behavior, speaks out of turn, reads unsuitable books, has even been caught wearing men's trousers." Mrs. Willoughby lowered her voice. 3 families returned her for attempting to educate their daughters beyond household duties. Another found her teaching their son to read rather than cleaning as instructed. Mr. Henderson tucked the envelope into his vest without opening it. "Sounds like someone with a mind of her own. That might not be such a bad thing where we're going." The journey to Whitewater Ranch was long and mostly silent. As they traveled further from town, the landscape opened into vast stretches of prairie and rolling hills. "Your ranch," Abigail finally ventured. "Is it large?" "Large enough. 2,500 acres, 200 head of cattle. It's just me, my son Thomas, and our ranch hand Samuel. My wife passed 5 years ago." "I'm sorry for your loss," Abigail said quietly. "Life goes on," he replied, looking out the window. "Ranch needs someone to cook, clean, keep things in order. My son's 16, good with horses but hopeless with housework." Abigail nodded, wondering if this would be another temporary stop in her journey. By sunset, they reached a long dirt road leading to a 2-story wooden house. Behind it stood a large barn, several corrals, and in the distance, grazing cattle dotted the hillsides. As the stagecoach pulled away, a tall young man emerged from the barn. His resemblance to Mr. Henderson was striking, though his features were unsoftened by age. "Pa," he nodded, then eyed Abigail suspiciously. "This her? This is Abigail Foster. Should be helping around the house," Mr. Henderson said. "Abigail, my son Thomas." Thomas barely acknowledged her with a grunt before turning to his father. "Samuel's out checking the north fence line. Found 2 calves separated from the herd this morning. We'll talk about it inside," Mr. Henderson said, gesturing for Abigail to follow. The house was spacious but neglected. Dust covered most surfaces, dishes were piled in the kitchen sink, and clothes were strewn about. It was clear no woman had managed this household for some time. "Your room's upstairs, last door on the right," Mr. Henderson said. "Get settled in. Dinner's whenever you can manage to make it." Abigail stood in the center of the chaos, surveying what would be her domain. For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. This wasn't a place concerned with proper etiquette or a lady's delicate constitution. This was a place that needed someone practical, someone who could work hard. Perhaps here, her difficulties might actually be strengths. Dawn broke over Whitewater Ranch, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. Abigail had been awake for an hour already, stoking the kitchen fire and assessing the pantry. The supplies were basic but adequate: flour, beans, coffee, cured meat, and some vegetables from a small garden that had clearly seen better days. By the time heavy footsteps sounded on the stairs, she had biscuits baking, coffee brewing, and was frying strips of salt pork in a cast-iron skillet. Mr. Henderson entered the kitchen, surprise evident in his expression. "You're up early." "Idle hands invite the devil's work," Abigail replied, repeating one of Mrs. Willoughby's favorite phrases with a hint of irony. "Indeed," he nodded, pouring himself coffee. "Though I suspect your hands are rarely idle." Thomas shuffled in next, his hair uncombed and eyes still heavy with sleep. He stopped short at the sight of the cooking and Abigail's already busy hands. "What's all this?" he asked suspiciously. "I believe it's called breakfast," Abigail replied, setting plates on the table. "Unless you prefer to start your day hungry." Thomas scowled but sat down, watching as she served the food with efficient movements. The meal passed in awkward silence until Mr. Henderson finally spoke. "Abigail, after breakfast, Thomas will show you around the property. You should know where everything is if you're to manage the house." "I'd rather show her the door," Thomas muttered, but fell silent under his father's stern gaze. After clearing the breakfast dishes, Abigail followed Thomas outside. His reluctance was palpable as he pointed out the barn, the tool shed, the chicken coop with its 6 hens, and the vegetable garden that had become overgrown with weeds. "Ma used to tend to that," he said gruffly, then quickly moved on. As they approached the corrals, a beautiful chestnut mare trotted up to the fence, nickering softly. "That's Ember," Thomas said, his voice softening for the first time. "Best cutting horse on the ranch." Abigail approached the fence, extending her hand. Palm up, the horse sniffed it curiously before nudging her fingers. "She likes you," came a deep voice from behind. A tall man with dark skin and broad shoulders approached, wiping his hands on a rag. "Horses are good judges of character." "Abigail, this is Samuel," Thomas introduced. "He's been with us since before I was born." Samuel nodded respectfully. "Miss Foster, good to have another set of hands around here. Things have been," he glanced at Thomas, neglected since Mrs. Henderson passed." "I'm not trying to replace anyone," Abigail said carefully, sensing the undercurrent of tension. "No one could," Thomas snapped, then stalked off toward the barn. Samuel watched him go with a sigh. "Don't mind him, miss. He took his mother's passing hard, never really recovered. And Mr. Henderson? Buried himself in work. That's his way of grieving." Samuel's dark eyes were kind but weary. "This ranch used to be full of life. Mrs. Henderson made sure of that, always had flowers on the table, bread baking in the oven. It sounds like she was special." "She was. Strong woman had to be to survive out here." He gestured to the vast landscape around them. "This country demands something from you, something many aren't willing to give." "What's that?" Abigail asked. "Everything," Samuel replied simply. It takes everything you've got, then asks for more. That afternoon, Abigail tackled the kitchen, scrubbing surfaces that hadn't seen soap in months. She found an old cookbook tucked in a drawer, its pages stained and well used. Inside the cover was written Elizabeth Henderson in elegant script. By evening, she had prepared a hearty stew with dumplings, following one of Elizabeth's recipes. The men returned from their work, dusty and tired, and stopped short at the transformed kitchen. The table was set, the floors swept, and the windows shone in the setting sun. Smells like ... Mr. Henderson began, then stopped, a shadow crossing his face. I found a cookbook, Abigail explained hastily. I hope you don't mind. He shook his head, taking his seat at the head of the table. No, it's good. Thomas entered, pausing at the doorway. His eyes darted around the kitchen, lingering on the familiar cookbook open on the counter. For a moment, pain flashed across his face before hardening into resentment. You shouldn't touch things that aren't yours, he said coldly. Thomas, his father warned. What? She comes in here, starts changing everything, going through Ma's things. Your mother would have wanted the house kept up, Mr. Henderson interrupted. You know that. Thomas stared at his father, then at Abigail, before storming out, letting the door slam behind him. Samuel took his seat with a sigh. He'll come around, Miss Foster. Just needs time. Abigail nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at her. The familiar feeling of being unwanted, of failing yet again, threatened to overwhelm her. The stew looks fine, Mr. Henderson said quietly, serving himself. Elizabeth would have approved. It wasn't much, but in that moment, it felt like enough. 3 weeks passed, each day establishing a new rhythm at Whitewater Ranch. Abigail rose before dawn, prepared breakfast, tended to the chickens, worked in the garden she was steadily reclaiming from weeds, and managed the endless cycle of cooking, cleaning, and mending that ranch life demanded. Thomas maintained his distance, speaking to her only when necessary. Yet Abigail noticed he no longer left the room when she entered, and occasionally she caught him watching her with a conflicted expression. One morning, as Abigail was hanging laundry on the line, she spotted a rider approaching fast. Mr. Henderson and Samuel were checking fence lines miles away, and Thomas was in the barn breaking a new colt. The rider, a young man barely older than Thomas, reined his horse to a stop in front of her. Is James Henderson here? It's urgent. He's out on the range, Abigail replied. What's happened? Rustlers hit the Campbell place last night. Stole 30 head and shot Mr. Campbell when he tried to stop them. Doc says he might not make it. Thomas emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his jeans. Matt, what's going on? Matt quickly repeated the news. Sheriff's gathering men to track them. They're heading north toward Blackwater Gorge. Thomas's face hardened. I'll get my rifle. Tell Sheriff Brooks I'll meet them at Campbell's in 20 minutes. Thomas, Abigail interjected. Shouldn't you wait for your father? There's no time, he snapped, striding toward the house. Those rustlers get to the gorge. They'll be impossible to track. I'll ride out and find your pa, Matt offered, already turning his horse. No need. Thomas emerged with his rifle and began saddling his horse. You head back to the Campbell place. I'll leave a note for Pa. Matt nodded and galloped away. Abigail followed Thomas to the barn. This is dangerous. Your father wouldn't want you going alone. What would you know about what my father wants? Thomas secured his saddle with quick, practiced movements. Or about anything out here. You've been here all of 3 weeks. I know enough to see you're acting rashly, Abigail persisted. At least take Samuel with you. Samuel's with Pa. By the time I found them, the rustlers would be long gone. He swung into the saddle. I can handle myself. Thomas, please, stay. Out of it, Abigail. This is ranch business. With that, he spurred his horse and galloped away, leaving Abigail standing alone in the yard. Hours passed with no sign of Mr. Henderson or Samuel. Abigail paced the kitchen, anxiety building with each passing minute. When she finally heard hoofbeats, she rushed outside to find Mr. Henderson dismounting, his expression grim when she relayed the news. "Damn fool boy," he muttered, his worry evident beneath his anger. "Samuel, get fresh horses. We're riding to Campbell's." "I'm coming too," Abigail said firmly. Mr. Henderson looked at her in surprise. "This isn't women's work, Abigail." "Neither is most of what I do," she countered. "I can ride, and you might need an extra pair of hands if someone's injured." For a moment, he seemed ready to refuse, then nodded curtly. "Saddle the bay mare. And bring my medical kit from the top shelf in the pantry." Elizabeth was handy with doctoring. 20 minutes later, they were galloping toward the Campbell Ranch. When they arrived, they found several men preparing to depart, the sheriff organizing them into groups. "Henderson," Sheriff Brooks nodded. "Your boy rode out with the first party about 4 hours ago. They were tracking the rustlers toward Blackwater Gorge." "Any word back?" Mr. Henderson asked, dismounting. "Nothing yet." The sheriff looked troubled. "I'm sending a second party now to back them up. Those rustlers are the Delaney gang. They've killed before and won't hesitate to do it again." Abigail felt cold fear settling in her stomach. Thomas was headstrong and angry, but the thought of him facing dangerous criminals made her realize how much she'd come to care about the sullen young man. Mr. Henderson turned to Samuel. "We're going after them. Sheriff, we'll take the East Ridge Trail. It's faster to the gorge." As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Campbell emerged from the house, her face streaked with tears. "James, Sarah's asking for you. Before you go." Mr. Henderson hesitated, then dismounted again. "I'll just be a minute," he told Samuel and Abigail. While they waited, Abigail approached Mrs. Campbell gently. "How is your husband?" "Doc says the bullet missed his heart by an inch," the woman replied, wringing her hands. "If the fever doesn't take him, he might pull through." Abigail squeezed her hand. "Is there anything you need? Anything I can do?" Mrs. Campbell looked at her with surprise, then gratitude. "You're James's new housekeeper? He mentioned you. Said you were turning things around at Whitewater." Before Abigail could respond, Mr. Henderson returned, his expression even more somber than before. "Let's ride," he said simply, mounting his horse. They took the East Ridge Trail as planned, pushing their horses hard. The terrain grew increasingly rugged as they approached the gorge, a deep ravine carved by the Blackwater River over countless centuries. "There!" Samuel suddenly pointed to a thin plume of smoke rising from a stand of pine trees halfway down. "The gorge wall. Campfire." Mr. Henderson signaled for them to dismount and proceed carefully on foot. As they crept closer, they heard voices, then caught glimpses of movement through the trees. 4 men were gathered around a small fire, while a 5th stood watch near a makeshift corral containing several dozen cattle. "I don't see Thomas or the others," Abigail whispered. "They must have split up," Samuel replied quietly. "The tracks fork about a mile back." Mr. Henderson surveyed the scene with experienced eyes. "We need to find Thomas first. These rustlers are dug in, and there are too many for us to take on alone." A sudden burst of gunfire echoed from farther down the gorge, causing all 3 to freeze. The rustlers in the camp below scrambled for their weapons. "That's where Thomas is," Mr. Henderson said grimly, already moving in the direction of the shots. "Samuel, stay with Abigail." "No," Abigail said firmly. "We stay together. 3 guns are better than 1. Mr. Henderson looked like he might argue, then nodded sharply. "Stay low and move quiet." They made their way through the underbrush, the sounds of gunfire growing louder. Finally, they reached a clearing where they could see the situation below. Thomas and 2 other men were pinned down behind a fallen log, exchanging fire with 3 rustlers who had taken positions among the rocks above them. "They're sitting ducks down there," Samuel muttered. Mr. Henderson's face was a mask of determination. Samuel, circle around to the east. I'll take the west. Abigail, stay here and provide covering fire when I give the signal. But I've never fired a rifle in combat, Abigail protested. You don't need to hit anything, he explained quickly. Just keep firing at those rocks so they keep their heads down while we get into position. Before she could respond, both men disappeared into the brush, leaving Abigail alone with the rifle. She took a deep breath, steadying herself against a tree as she had seen Mr. Henderson do. Below, she could see Thomas reloading his rifle, his movements quick but controlled. Minutes stretched like hours as she waited for the signal. When it finally came a sharp, two-note whistle like a meadowlark, Abigail raised the rifle and began firing toward the rustlers' position. Just as Mr. Henderson had instructed, the ensuing chaos was a blur of gunfire and shouting. Mr. Henderson and Samuel had successfully flanked the rustlers, forcing them to abandon their advantageous position. Thomas and his companions seized the opportunity to scramble to better cover. When the shooting finally stopped, two rustlers lay dead, one was wounded, and the third had surrendered. Thomas emerged from cover, dirt-streaked and breathless but unharmed. Abigail felt her legs go weak with relief as she made her way down to join them. That was some shooting, Pa, Thomas was saying, then stopped short when he saw Abigail approaching with the rifle. What is she doing here? Saving your hide, Mr. Henderson replied gruffly. If she hadn't come along, we might not have found you in time. Thomas looked at Abigail, confusion warring with gratitude on his face. You came after me? We all did, she said simply. That's what family does. The word hung in the air between them, unexpected and transformative. For the first time since she'd arrived at Whitewater Ranch, Thomas looked at her not as an intruder, but as someone who belonged. Autumn painted the Montana landscape in hues of gold and crimson as Whitewater Ranch prepared for winter. 3 months had passed since the confrontation with the rustlers, bringing changes that went beyond the shifting seasons. The Campbell family had recovered, with Mr. Campbell slowly regaining his strength under his wife's devoted care. The surviving rustlers faced justice in the territorial court, their testimonies leading to the capture of other members of the Delaney gang. But the most profound transformations had occurred within the walls of the Henderson home. Abigail stood at the kitchen window, watching as Thomas demonstrated to a local farmer's daughter how to properly bridle a horse. The girl, Mary Sutton, listened attentively, her admiration for Thomas evident in her shy smiles and eager questions. He's sweet on her, Mr. Henderson commented, joining Abigail at the window. Has been since the harvest dance last month. She seems lovely, Abigail replied, smiling at the young woman's obvious delight when Thomas let her take the reins. Smart, too. She asked thoughtful questions about your cattle breeding program when she came for dinner last week. Mr. Henderson nodded, a hint of pride in his expression. Thomas needs someone with sense. Too much like me, otherwise all impulse, no patience. Abigail laughed softly. I've noticed some improvement in that department, for both of you. It was true. The tension that had characterized their household in those early weeks had gradually dissolved, replaced by something that felt remarkably like harmony. Thomas no longer bristled at Abigail's presence. Instead, he often sought her advice on matters ranging from mending his shirts to navigating his budding courtship with Mary. Mr. Henderson, too, had slowly emerged from the shell of grief he'd constructed around himself. He spoke more at meals, occasionally sharing stories of Elizabeth that made his eyes crinkle with bittersweet remembrance rather than cloud with pain. Winter will be here soon, Mr. Henderson observed, sipping the coffee Abigail had prepared. Samuel says it'll be a hard one. We're well prepared, Abigail assured him. The root cellar is stocked, the firewood split and stacked, and I've put up enough preserves to last until spring. He nodded, studying her with thoughtful eyes. You've done well here, Abigail. Better than I expected when I read that letter from Mrs. Willoughby. You read it? Abigail asked, surprised. She had assumed he'd discarded the envelope with its damning assessment of her character, eventually. After you'd been here about a month, he set his cup down. Bunch of nonsense about you being defiant, improper, and unfit for decent society. Abigail felt her cheeks warm. Mrs. Willoughby had certain ideas about a woman's place and proper behavior, so I gathered. Mr. Henderson's weathered face softened into a rare smile. Seems to me she missed what matters. Out here, we need people who think for themselves, who can face challenges head-on. Thank you, Abigail said quietly, touched by his words. He cleared his throat, suddenly awkward. Actually, that's something I wanted to discuss with you. Your arrangement here. Abigail's heart sank. Despite the improvements, perhaps he still saw her as temporary help, someone to get them through until a more suitable arrangement could be made. I understand, she began, trying to keep disappointment from her voice. If you think it's time for me to move on. Move on? He looked genuinely startled. That's not what I meant at all. I was going to suggest making your position more permanent. Permanent? Abigail echoed, confused. Mr. Henderson reached into his pocket and withdrew a folded document. I've been corresponding with Judge Wilson in Helena. These are adoption papers, if you're amenable. Abigail stared at the papers, unable to comprehend his words at first. Adoption? You're still a minor by law, he explained, his gruff voice gentler than she'd ever heard it. Without a legal guardian, your position is precarious. Anyone, including Mrs. Willoughby, could demand your return to that home. But why would you? Abigail trailed off, emotion threatening to overwhelm her. Because you belong here, he said simply. Thomas sees it too, though he'd rather eat nails than admit how much he's come to rely on you. Samuel said it first, actually. Said you've brought life back to Whitewater. Tears welled in Abigail's eyes as she carefully took the papers. I don't know what to say. Say yes, came Thomas's voice from the doorway. He stood there, hat in hand, his usual guardedness replaced by uncharacteristic vulnerability. Pa's right, you belong here. You knew about this. Abigail asked. Thomas nodded. It was my idea, actually. After the Rustlers, when you said that thing about family. He shifted uncomfortably. I was awful to you when you first came, I thought. You thought I was trying to replace your mother, Abigail finished softly. Yeah. He looked down, then back up, meeting her eyes directly. But nobody could replace her. That doesn't mean there isn't room for you, though. As my sister. The word hung in the air, precious and unexpected. Abigail had been sent back by 5 families, each rejection reinforcing Mrs. Willoughby's assertion that she was unfit, unwanted, too difficult to love. Yet here stood a father and son, rough-edged, imperfect, and genuine, offering her not just a place but a name, a home. Yes, she said through tears, her voice steady despite her emotion. Yes, I would be honored. That evening, as snowflakes began to dance outside the windows, the 3 of them sat before the fireplace. Thomas was whittling a small wooden horse, occasionally holding it up for Abigail's approval. Mr. Henderson James, as he'd asked her to call him, was reading a letter from Mary's father, confirming the Suttons' visit for Sunday dinner. Abigail worked on her embroidery, a skill Elizabeth Henderson had apparently excelled at. According to the samplers Abigail had found carefully preserved in a cedar chest. She was creating a new one with the words Whitewater Ranch surrounded by wildflowers. She'd gathered and pressed during the summer. Mrs. Willoughby would faint dead away if she could see me now, Abigail remarked with a wry smile. Sitting here doing needlework like a proper young lady, Thomas snorted. After shooting at rustlers and riding astride like a man? I don't think the needlework makes up for that in her books. Probably not, Abigail agreed, laughing. But I'm starting to think perhaps we define our own propriety out here. James looked up from his letter. Elizabeth used to say something similar. She said the frontier strips away pretense, leaves you with what's real. I wish I could have known her, Abigail said softly. She would have liked you, James replied with certainty. She had no patience for artifice either. Thomas added another careful cut to his carving. Ma used to say that difficult times reveal true character. That's why she loved it out here, despite the hardships. Said you could always count on people showing their true selves. Abigail considered this as she made another careful stitch. Then I suppose I should thank Mrs. Willoughby and all those families who sent me back. If they hadn't found me so unsuitable, I might never have found where I truly belong. Outside, the snow fell more heavily, blanketing Whitewater Ranch in pristine white. Inside, the fire crackled warmly, casting golden light on three people who had, against all odds, become a family. Abigail Foster, once branded unfit for a proper home, had finally found one with the very qualities that had once condemned her. Independence, her outspokenness, her unwillingness to conform, were not just accepted but valued. Here, in this rugged country that demanded everything you had to give, she had found her place. And as she looked at the faces of her new family, illuminated by firelight and acceptance, Abigail knew with certainty that she was at last truly home.